You are with Al24 News Channel with our continuous live coverage on the latest events about Russian military operation in Ukraine, where the latest events regarding urgent meetings continues condemnation of the Russia's military operation in Ukraine right after this break. Well, we begin with the UN Human Rights Office reported that 249 civilians have been killed and 553 injured. Some 17 of those killed were children and 27 were women in the first week of the crisis, with the toll having risen overnight from 227 deaths and 525 injured reported. On the other hand, Russia's Ministry of Defense reported that 498 Russian troops killed in Ukraine and 1,597 more sustained wounds in the first report of casualties by Moscow since the military operation started. And to discuss more today's thorny file, as usual, I welcome via Skype from the Ukrainian capital, Valentina Kushik, Professor of International Relations, in addition to Pratik Joshi, Cold War and Indian Foreign Policy Oxford PhD candidate, who joins us from India. Well, I start with you, Valentin. From the latest political developments, specifically the Russian-Ukrainian negotiations in Belarus that took place yesterday, what do you think about this consensus between the two parties on establishing humanitarian corridors and a temporary ceasefire?
This is the only result, discussion about humanitarian corridors, which are really needed for many cities in Ukraine. In particular, it touches my family, our relatives are 30 kilometers from our place near the airport of Gostomel. They are there for already 8 days without electricity, without water, and there are constant fightings there. So I am trying to establish contacts between different institutions here and abroad, how to help these approximately 1,000 people here near Kiev. And the same situation is in the south of Ukraine, definitely. The decision to start establish these corridors is very urgent, but there is no progress. In my case, no progress, and in other cases. So it's necessary to implement. It's the first step. The next step should be ceasefire and discussion of real conditions.
So, Valentin, here you don't think that it is a positive point for Russian President Vladimir Putin when he accepted this?
Well, it is a positive point, small positive step forward, but it's not implemented. So something has to be done. And you see what is important. The Red Cross international staff was evacuated from here, with whom we can do this work. So there should be some additional, new structures. So please think, maybe your Algerian government may think about it. Maybe royal families in the Arab world will think how to create the framework for informal contact.
Of course, Algeria has always played a significant role in such, let's say, conflicts between countries. And before I bring into our conversation with Pratik, let's listen together to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky calls on the West to increase military assistance to Ukraine or to set a specific date for the closure of the Ukrainian sky.
Конкретно вбивають наших людей.
They are specifically killing our people. This is happening both from the territory of Belarus and from the territory of Russia. These missiles, bombs, explosive planes, bombers are flying. All this happens. I asked to close the sky. I turned to President Biden. I seem to have turned to Scholz and Macron. I say it seems because I make 20 to 30 international calls a day. I do it every day, and I said that if you can't block the sky now, then tell us when it will be
Я
possible.
сказав, що якщо ви не можете
Well, welcome to our program, Pratik Joshi, and I would like to put this question to you. Zelensky has also said that Europe is not providing Ukraine with enough support. What more does Zelensky need?
Thank you so much for inviting me about the present conflict which is going on. It's very unfortunate, but at the same time, what I sense is that since 2014, Ukraine has already bought approximately 2.5 to 3 billion dollars worth of armed support and weaponry from the United States. As far as the present context is concerned, I don't think so. Ukraine is, in the state of requesting just a moral support which the Europe has been providing to them. They need something concrete because bureaucratic procedures at the EU or the NATO are very different, and what Ukraine needs at the time and what President Zelensky has been requesting at the time is very different. It's the de jure versus de facto. That's where I see the dissonance coming from, and that's what he needs.
All right. Here, back to you, Valentin. Deciphering the speech of Zelensky, we can notice that he always addresses President Putin in person. Do you think it's a sign of strength or weakness?
Well, maybe I didn't pay attention personally to this fact, but from what you have said, I would see two possible answers to that. First, in this way, President Zelensky shows that they are on the same level, irrespective of the fact that Russia is a big country. So he demands equal recognition of Ukrainian interests. And the second one is that Russian political system is constructed around an autocratic president who has all powers, and in this case, the start of the war was his decision. I'm sure that many of his advisors would not recommend this. He didn't have enough information about the correlation of forces and about damaging results for Russia of what decision was taken. So I think this is the case. When Ukrainian leader says that it's up to the Russian leader to take decisions and to stop his mistakes, which are mixed with criminal acts. The war between our countries has to be stopped. President Zelensky is doing on his level, others are doing on their level. So the same I am doing. Before the war started, I was telling that there is no chance for a war between Russia and Ukraine. Really?
I just remember this very well. You have insisted on this several times, but it wasn't the case right after. All right.
Because if somebody loses connection with the reality, or I may say if he's possessed by evil demons, that is the result, like Saddam Hussein did. So
all right, we better keep into the story or the topic of Russia-Ukraine here, and I'll take you to this piece of information. Several dozens of people were killed in fierce battle for control of the southern Ukrainian city of Kherson as Russia's operation in numerous Ukrainian cities increased and fears about the civilian toll grew. Since the military operation began a week ago, more than 800,000 residents have fled, with worries of further deaths. On Wednesday morning, Ukraine's state emergency service reported heavy shelling and bombing of Kharkiv, the country's second biggest city. Back to you, Pratik. The Russian president stressed that the special military operation in Ukraine is going according to plan and in full compliance with the timetable. Does this mean that the goal is to be achieved? Pratik, please.
Yeah, if we read his speech in the context of the great power rivalry that has been there in the last 70 years, especially the post-World War order, So he's kind of summarizing how the Americans have been at the forefront of the destabilization campaigns throughout these decades, and why he's not going to allow this in Ukraine. Now, by that, I don't mean to say this is my interpretation, but it's his reading of how he wants to avoid the same plot being played out in Ukraine. And I think the speed with which the army has rolled into Ukraine, it actually seems that he's very clear with what he wants to do by not making Ukraine a site of, what he sees to be, being played out in different parts of the world, especially the Middle East and Afghanistan. So he's very precise on that.
Now let's take you all together to one piece of story that is streaming all in the media outlets. Europe's largest nuclear power plant in Ukraine was under shelling last night. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky condemned the act, saying Russia is restoring to nuclear terror. Nabil Khazini reports.
Images enough to send shudders around the world and to frighten European leaders. Last night, Europe's largest nuclear power plant was under shelling. Today, it is under the control of the Russian forces, and this has raised concern in the UN nuclear watchdog. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky accused Moscow of resorting to nuclear terror.
We are alerting everyone to the fact that no other country except Russia has ever fired on nuclear power plants. This is the first time in our history, the first time in the history of mankind. This terrorist state now resorts to nuclear terror.
After speaking with Ukraine's energy minister about the situation at the nuclear power plant, U.S. Secretary of Energy Jennifer Granholm tweeted that her country has activated its nuclear incident response team and is monitoring the situation along with the Department of Defense.
Energy has activated its nuclear incident response team and is monitoring events in consultation with Department of Defense, NRC Gov, and the White House. We've seen no elevated radiation readings near the facility.
Russian troops have advanced in many parts of Ukraine. Earlier this week, citizens of Inner Hodor in southeastern Ukraine blocked the entrance to the town with trucks, barricades, and a human chain to prevent Russian forces from entering. The city is home to the nuclear power plant, the largest in Europe and the 10th in the world, whose workers have joined the blockade.
And for more insights regarding this, and maybe this file, will dig a little bit further with our guests and panel of guests. And here, back to you, Valentin. Do you think that this military operation, in your opinion, establish new alliances and axes that will have their own strategy in the future?
Which operation? You mean the general operation?
Generally speaking, and practically when you speak about today's operation, when it comes to the nuclear plant in Ukraine.
As to nuclear plant capture operation, it's a new stage in developing of the military tactics. It was never before in the world. Well, there were cases when nuclear bombs were dropped on Japan in Nagasaki and Hiroshima, but nobody yet captured the nuclear power stations. In this case, it was without a tragedy. It was definitely something new in military tactics. Well, Ukrainians are attacked by the invader. It's a criminal act. But what was today, we were lucky that we didn't have the results of a caliber of Chernobyl. But by the way, take into consideration that Chernobyl nuclear station is also under control of the Russian forces. They first captured Chernobyl, then now
but here, according to news reports, it's not under really the control of the Russian forces, but they helped each other in order to keep the Chernobyl nuclear plant safe. We will dig into this point just a bit later, okay?
It's an interesting point for journalistic work and for diplomatic work. What is happening in Chernobyl? I think there is some kind of cooperation between the local security and Russian forces. which is necessary for this case, if it is the fact. I don't know for sure. And as to Zaporizhia, there are confusing informations coming from Ukrainian side and from Russian side. Ukrainian side is saying that there are still there is still fighting there, and that.
But we haven't heard. This is only Yakushik. According to the story that we have heard from Ukraine, we haven't heard the version from Russia so far up until this minute, right? So let me just.
Russian story that they control. Yeah.
We will discuss a little bit later. We will discuss a little bit later this more. And now back to you, Pratik. Is the world today shaken just to give birth to a new world order?
I think after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the idea of the world order was once again propounded by the Americans. As in the last decade or so, they've come up with concepts like rules-based order, or things like the broader theaters which they have talked about, be it Indo-Pacific, Asia-Pacific. I think that if not a new order, the rules set by the Americans, this debate is to do with the rules set by Americans not being honored, and which is enough to create the narrative of Russians or the Chinese trying to refashion the world order. I'm not saying this is wrong, but it's still subject to debate. But at least the idea of a regional order, we can be sure about them. And my last point would be that the idea that we are up for a new order, or there are some signs that the new world order is taking shape, that will purely depend on positions taken by China and to a less extent by middle powers like India and Turkey, because they are giving mixed signals at present. And but yes, the whole idea that there is a nostalgia about Soviet Union or the Tsarist era, we cannot rule that out. That's there.
All right. This is according to you, Pratik. And now let's move all together to listen to a series of reactions right after the following the latest when it comes to the nuclear power plant that was targeted last night. And here, NATO foreign ministers arrived for a meeting on the crisis in Ukraine. NATO foreign ministers condemned Russia's bombing of Ukrainian nuclear power plant. Let's have a listen.
We strongly condemn this attack on the integrity of a nuclear structure whose security must be guaranteed. And we strongly support the initiatives of the International Atomic Energy Agency to ask Russia to cease all aggression of this type.
Late in the night, obviously we condemn such an egregious attack that puts the security and health of civilians at risk, not only in the city but also throughout the region.
We have to strengthen the eastern flank of NATO. Speaking of NATO action, as the European Union, we will continue to discuss sanctions, and we have to make sure that all international community understand that this is a serious violation of any thinkable international law and even nuclear regulation. Okay, so.
NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has condemned the bombardment by Russian forces that hit the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in southern Ukraine and called for an end to the war. Let's follow.
We condemn the attacks on civilians, and over the night we have also seen reports about the attack against the nuclear power plant. This just demonstrates the recklessness of this war and the importance of ending it, and the importance of Russia withdrawing all its troops and engaging good faith in diplomatic efforts.
Also, the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency told a news conference on Friday that the shelling caused no release of radioactive material at the Zaporizhzhia plant in southeastern Ukraine. The fire sparked by the attack was put out. Let's have a listen.
Plant reactors units, I must say that of all the units that we have there, there's only one that is operating at around 60% of its capacity. Unit 1 was in outage for maintenance. Units 2 and 3 are in safety controlled shutdown. Unit 4 is the one that is still operating at 60%, and units 5 and 6 were already being held in reserve, and they are operating normally in low power mode. I must indicate that 2 people have been injured.
Well, back to you, Valentin, as a follow-up to what we have heard. Well, we have just spoken about Russia and Ukraine helping each other into protecting the Chernobyl nuclear power plant last week. Why do you think that it's not the case when it comes to the Zaporizhzhia?
I think it will be the case because first is the protection of the whole world, of the environment. I'm sure Ukrainians and Russians will find joint positions on this, how not to destroy the nuclear power stations. And for me, it's for sure. Fighting may be in any place of Ukraine, in any place of the world, but not there. So it was one of the arguments why the war in Ukraine is impossible, because incredible, because in Ukraine there are many such power plants as in Zaporizhzhia. What will be then if they started with Zaporizhzhia? I think that it is the factor for stopping war in the nearest days, because, well, if there is tendency towards turning Ukraine into a new Syria or new Iraq with total destruction of the territory of infrastructures, nuclear power stations are a deterrent for both parties and for international community.
Okay, so I'll put this point to Pratik and here. Do you think, Pratik, that these are signs of a nuclear war?
I think fundamentally nuclear weapons symbolize deterrence rather than to attack. But we also have this reality that President Putin ordered Russia's nuclear command into a state of alert.
Yeah.
And it's the first time since the Russian Federation has come into existence, 1991. I would still reserve my comments that this is just signaling rather than the threat of an offensive, but that totally depends on the extent to which the Americans play the ball.
Here, still with the same story, Valentin, back to you. What has changed in the tactics of the Russia on the ground when seizing the nuclear power plant, taking into consideration that Russia has put its nuclear weapons into highest alert deterrence, as Pratik has just mentioned? Is Putin simply his words into actions as starting from the second week of the military operation?
First of all, I think that there is no connection between these military actions and alert of Russian nuclear forces. That was just to threaten the West, not to get involved. It's not practical step. Russia is not ready to attack by its nuclear weapons. And as to capturing Zaporizhzhia nuclear station, I think it fills within this strategy of capturing now, within these days, as much as possible of the territories, of encircling big cities, in order to have some, imaginative advantage at the table.
What are these advantages?
Well, Russia starts showing that, you see, I control this territory, that territory. If you don't agree to our demands, we will capture other territories. But in fact, for Russia, capturing the territories means the same as for Napoleon in 1812, capturing Moscow. He came to Moscow, was sitting there for a Russian Tsar, Russian emperor to come and sign the agreement in which he fully accepts the demands of Napoleon, but it was in vain. There was a great patriotic war in Russia. Something like that, this kind of mistake Mr. Putin is doing in Ukraine. Ukraine has already popular war, patriotic war, it cannot be won. And there are deterrents why Russia cannot conduct this total destruction war because of nuclear power stations. If they destroy nuclear power stations in Ukraine, Russian territory will be affected. European territories will be affected. So I think this is the strategy of capturing some more territories in order to put forward these tough demands, which Ukraine will not accept. So
this is according to you, Valentin. However, so far, practically we have only heard the Ukrainian side of the story so far, and we haven't heard any confirmation from the Russian side. I mean, is there anything that has been played behind the scenes?
Just to clarify, by confirmation, you mean the Russian side of the events on the side. You mean that?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
Yeah. So what I can say is that since the situation in Ukraine is grave and we're actually seeing destruction in worst possible forms, so it is natural that all the sympathies and the attention are directed towards Ukraine, and which should be done. But on the political side, on the interpretation side of the events, I think since the global media, especially the American media and the Eurocentric media, which literally dominates the mainstream media outlets like other media spaces, that naturally eliminates the Russian side of the story. But at the same time, I can guarantee you that in India or in Pakistan or in Afghanistan, where we have seen the after effects of Cold War or certain dynamics of the Cold War at play, there is a reason to believe President Putin's statements. Now, by that does not mean it's right, but considering the fact that what has happened in the great power rivalry over the last 7 decades, the political spectrum, the military people, they do take some, some information coming out of the Russia with some seriousness.
Now let's move to another piece of information. Russian forces have launched full-scale military operation in Ukraine. Multiple Ukrainian cities and villages were shelled by missiles, helicopters and tanks, while ground forces had begun operating in multiple parts of Ukraine. Sofian Kenturi reports.
Russia stepped up its bombardment of Ukraine's biggest cities, firing missiles on target in populated areas as Vladimir Putin's forces turned to more fierce military tactics in a bid to regain momentum. On the first week of the operation, a Russian military struck Kyiv's television tower, briefly disrupting broadcast. According to Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, a video provided by Ukrainian officials showed additional explosions nearby Bin Yar, Holocaust monument which killed at least 5 people.
What is the point of saying never again for 80 years? If the world stays silent when a bomb drops on the same site of Babin Yar, at least 5 killed. History repeating.
The operation and the bombardment reached Chernihiv, Kherson and Zhytomyr just few days after the operation started, causing human and material damages. In Kharkiv, a large explosion struck central, Ukraine's second largest city, on Tuesday directly in front of the city's administration building, creating a huge fireball that appeared in a video to engulf several cars driving through an area called Freedom Square. In the same city, residents accused Russian forces of targeting civilians.
Well, the Russian President Vladimir Putin says that the Russian army is fighting bravely like real heroes in Ukraine against nationalist and new Nazi groups, and among them foreign mercenaries, including some from the Middle East. Let's have a listen.
The course of military action itself shows exactly who we are fighting against: nationalist and neo-Nazi groups, and among them foreign mercenaries, including some from the Middle East, who use peaceful civilians as human shields.
Приспешников нацистов, которые в годы Великой Отечественной войны воевали. И то, что мы воюем именно с неонацистами,
I will never abandon my belief that the Russians and Ukrainians are one people, even though some of the people of Ukraine have been intimidated. Many have been duped by nationalist propaganda, and some have deliberately, of course, followed the lead of Bandera and other Nazi henchmen, who, during the Great Patriotic War, fought alongside Hitler.
За безопасность Отечества, за наш народ, за народ России.
Well, back to you, Valentin. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov spoke about extracting a new Nazism. What does he mean? Or can you just simply explain what does this, let's say, term refers to the simple audience, please?
Well, neo-Nazism may be understood in two ways. One, these are real groups which exist in many countries, which believe in what Hitler and his team were saying and doing. There are such right-wing, ultra-nationalist and racist groups. There are few of them in Ukraine. Well, you may find 100, 200 such people. Now, some of them went into the army after Ukrainian Revolution of 2014. But they are slight minority there. And the second meaning of neo-Nazism, it's a like cliche against tough ethnic nationalists who are quite powerful. Well, maybe if there are elections, they will get 10 or 20, 25%. They are not the majority. But now, what is Putin doing? He tries to stigmatize all who are fighting against the invasion as neo-Nazis. And there are different forces who are fighting. There are military who do, the army. There are just civilians who went into militias. And there are local people who come to the streets where Russian army comes and say, goodbye, we didn't invite you here. So they provoked a movement of the whole people. These people cannot be claimed to be neo-Nazis. There are different people. Now we do not hear Ukrainian opposition.
Thank you, Valentin. Pratik, by the beginning of the second week of the Russian operation in Ukraine, how do you read Putin's speech to the Russian people?
He's definitely trying to instill a sense of militarized nationalism in the Russian population. Because somewhere down the line, he has also realized that he needs, the way the Russian government operates, there is a strong need to have a strongman image to retain that populist, support for Putin. And I think this whole idea of reviving a Soviet style or a nostalgic idea of Russia being ruled by great rulers who are at the service of Russia's defenses. The speech is very much imbued with these, undertones that whatever may be his own intentions, but he definitely wants the people to come along with him, and not only the Russians within the Russia's territorial boundaries, but the ones who are living in Ukraine and territories of the Eastern Europe. So this is an idea of projection.
Okay. All right. Let's move all together to some updates regarding the thorny file of Russia-Ukraine. French President Emmanuel Macron said he spoke with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin Thursday morning, stressing the need to continue efforts to avoid the worst. Macron said that Putin refused to stop his operation in Ukraine. At this stage, Putin assured Macron that Russia intends to continue fighting relentlessly against the fighters of the nationalist formations during the special operation to protect Donbass. And we are going to move to a piece of information regarding Algeria. Algerian nationals were evacuated from the Romanian capital amidst the situation in Ukraine. Members of the Algerian community expressed their appreciation for the efforts made by the Algerian authorities to evacuate them in good conditions. Let's have a listen.
There was shelling in Dnipro, so we were transferred to Lviv by bus and then went by foot till the Polish frontier, walking for 75 kilometers. Poland evacuated us to Romania, and we came from Romania to Algeria. Employees of the Algerian embassy in Romania did their job really well, and as they should. Be it in accommodation, food, or anything. They were not in need of anything. They took well care of them, and we were proud of having such embassy employees. We're not worried about our children, as the embassy treats them this well. So even in the future, if they go elsewhere, we will be content.
International organizations indicate that about 1 million Ukrainians were forced to flee the country from the military operation that Russia launched on Ukraine about a week ago, and amid expectations of a significant increase in the number of refugees. Hussein Berkan reports.
The United Nations announced the crossing of more than 1 million refugees from Ukraine towards neighboring countries following the Russian military intervention. According to data published by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, more than 1 million refugees crossed the Ukraine according to data published by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, more than 1 million refugees crossed from Ukraine to neighboring countries between February 24 and March 2nd. More than half of them headed to Poland. The UNHCR indicated that more than 900,000 refugees crossed to Poland, Hungary, Moldova, and Slovakia. The organization also warned that the deteriorating situation in Ukraine could cause 4 million civilians to flee the country.
I'm from the Zhytomyr region. Missiles explode there. A rocket fell on the maternity ward. My relatives remained there. My husband defends our country.
The organization also indicated that 96,000 people crossed between February 18 and 23rd from Donetsk and Luhansk regions toward Russia.
We are from Kramatorsk, Donetsk region. We left because of the war. I'm scared to go to bed. I'm scared for my child's life. And we just packed up and we left. We traveled 1,007 kilometers to get here.
At the dawn of last February 24, Russia launched a military operation in Ukraine, which was followed by angry international reactions and the imposition of tough economic and financial sanctions on Moscow.
Back to you, Valentin, and just in less than a minute, if you just can, what is the purpose of the West to plan a war against Russia?
Well, I don't think that the West planned the war against Russia this case. For the West, it was a good chance.
What about the sanctions? What about the military equipment that help in here, Ukraine? I mean, there is, after all, a war being indirectly probably launched against Russia.
From the formal point of view, they are absolutely right. They helped the country which was attacked. But I think there is much bigger issue here. Russia got into a trap which was created for it for a long time. It repeated the trap of Saddam Hussein, and I don't.
We better just keep not bring into other, because it's a conflict has its own story, has its own reference, has its own conditions. We can't really bring them into the case of Ukraine. A similarity probably in your case, or according to you, Valentin. We better keep with Russia and Ukraine.
Okay. In this case, Ukraine wants to be part of the West. The West wants Ukraine to be its first stage of fighting with Russia. So it provides all the necessary, or a lot of military equipment. The West doesn't go by its military forces directly. Only some volunteers or private military companies are there. Absolutely correct tactics. Russia is in a trap. The West is going to destroy Russia. And Mr. Biden, President of the United States.
This is according to you, Valentin Yakushik. In less than a minute, what do you think, Pratik, are likely the scenarios to end this war?
The kind of scenario which we are seeing, I'm sure it will not be agreed by the Ukrainian government. So I know it's a very sad picture I'm kind of putting up, but the Russians, if the West does not intervene, and if the the way the Americans are not really coming up with any concrete things, if they don't show up, the Russians will have their own way. They'll impose their own conditions. They might get the government changed.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Very, very special thanks to Pratik Joshi and Professor of International Relations Valentin Yakushik, who joined us both from India and Ukraine. That's all for today's live coverage. Please stay tuned on Al 24 News channel for more news. Bye-bye.